3 years. One thing that's for sure, everybody knows who Unifor is.
Joining me now from Toronto, the national president of Unifor,
the country's largest private sector union.
We need to bargain trade deals that benefit Canadians. It can't just be for the benefit of large international corporations. We are speaking out for working class people, and they expect a voice.
Joining me now, the president of Unifor, Jerry Dias. Good to see you.
Well, the election is really about the Conservatives, and our members are going to make up their own minds, but our convention knows that we can't live with another 4 years of Stephen Harper. That's clear.
Unifor President Jerry Dias says it's time for unions to start setting the agenda.
So young people have had it. They're stuck in low-paying jobs. They're stuck in, retail, hospitality. So what was once just a stepping stone is no longer a stepping stone. Now they're caught in those jobs, and they're mad as hell.
Well, Mr. Dias, you're always interesting to talk to. You like to stir things up. I appreciate that. Thanks very much for your time.
There can't be justice in this debate unless we find solutions and work with the Indigenous people around the world.
You have to understand the wants and needs of all of your members, and that's why pride is so important for Unifor. One thing that is for sure, we are going to solidify the auto footprint in 2016 negotiations. There's no question we're going to find solutions. The auto industry just doesn't understand that yet.
We were born to take on this fight.
This is about us understanding where we are, fix the last 10 years, and then plow forward as we move forward to the type of country that we all expect.
Well, good morning. Thank you and good morning, Unifor. Good morning. Salut, Unifor.
Salut, Unifor, and welcome to Ottawa.
Great room. Do you know what this hall looks like from here? This room looks like the power of organized working people. This is what democracy looks like. This is what solidarity looks like. You know, my wonderful friend Peter, we never in all of the years ever disagreed with what the final objective should look like. We frequently disagreed about how we were going to get there, but never about what the end result should have been. And it shows our differences because he talks about as you walk around Ottawa that what you feel, the difference you feel is the vibe. I walked around Ottawa and I was kind of smelling the air, and I came to the conclusion that the air in Ottawa smelled so much better because of 10 years of Stephen Harper stench is now out of Ottawa. Sisters and brothers, the screens and banners around this hall say that it's time. And it is our time. It's our time to go the next stage in building this incredible union. But first, this convention must be our time to take stock of our first 3 years. Can I have a show of hands? Who was at our founding convention in Toronto 3 years ago on Labor Day? Raise your hands. Right on. How many people here are first-time delegates? Raise your hands. Right on. Welcome, sisters and brothers. There is a saying, sometimes attributed to Mark Twain, that the two most important moments in a life are when you are born and when you realize what it is you were born to accomplish. I'm going to speak to you this morning about how I see our first 3 years as a union for change and the realization that our purpose in the labor movement and in Canada. I remember introducing myself to you 3 years ago in Toronto by telling you a family story. I said it was representative of the Canadian immigrant experience, an experience which meant sacrifice and dislocation for my parents, but opportunity for me and my 3 sisters who are here today. I told you that my father was a former CAW representative. And my mother was a machine operator in the old bookbinders union that became a part of the former CEP. As I was accepting the highest honor that our union could bestow, I was also thinking about my mother, who had very recently been admitted into a long-term care home. I was thinking about her health and asking myself, what could I do to make a difference in her life and for my father? It made it very personal to ask, what is the purpose of all we do? 3 years later, I have a better understanding of our purpose. And it goes like this. First, we organize as working people and build solidarity. Then we use our solidarity to build economic power through collective bargaining. Bargaining power in multiple sectors of the economy gives us political power and influence. That influence gives us social power to build a labor movement capable of making the changes that affect people's daily lives and their futures. We were created to make change, and we have. But increasingly our role is to leverage our power, to define real change that makes a difference in the daily lives of working people and in the power relationships in our society. Let me remember where we began from on September the 1st, 2013. We left Toronto on that Labor Day weekend with a constitution and an org chart. Our regional councils, our industry councils, Quebec Council, our equity committees, our other standing committees, and even our new National Executive Board all had to be created. The offices and staff and systems of two fully functioning organizations had to be made into one. Hundreds of local union leaders, many of you here today in this room, had to come forward to make our new structures and to breathe life into them. Hundreds of hours were spent preparing and shaping our new union to fulfill the visions in our founding documents. All of this, of course, is a work in progress, and no one will argue that any part of our new union has been perfected. But think for a moment about our new regional councils and the incredible forums they have created for our local union activists. Our regional councils are assemblies unlike anything that either of our predecessor unions had known. They have been powerful, emotional events. Could we now imagine a Unifor without our regional councils? Sisters and brothers, when we began 3 years ago, we did not have the luxury of putting the core work of the union aside while we built Unifor from the ground up. To the contrary, we made a commitment to the membership that representation and bargaining would be seamless, and that the strength of the national union would be at the back of every bargaining unit, large and small. Have we delivered? Our members have told us through the ratification votes in more than 1,000 rounds of bargaining over the past 3 years that the answer is yes. You have delivered. Across the board, we move the yardsticks forward, not back. And there are so many wins and gains that we can be proud of. Let me mention a few, in only a few. In 2013, just as we formed our union, we were in bargaining with the CAMI division of General Motors. At a time where the discussion of the day, and still exists today, precarious jobs, temporary workers, part-time jobs, non-standard jobs, we were able to go into bargaining with General Motors, and we changed and we converted 300 temporary jobs to full-time permanent jobs, which really started the ball rolling and moving in this area. And then I went into bargaining with the pulpies in our union, resolute in 2014. And that bargaining was a defining moment for us. Why? Because they will tell you, 4 years prior, when we were in bargaining with then Abitibi-Bowater, the company was in bankruptcy. And we gave wages, benefits. And if you can imagine, when we went back to work, we had to agree on the jobs that were going to be outsourced in order to keep the company alive. But then when we went back to the bargaining table 4 years later with a new owner, instead of trying to reward the workers for the sacrifice, they wanted more. And let me tell you, they came to the bargaining table wanting more, and they left the bargaining table getting nothing. And I'll tell you who got more. It was our workers, our members, that got our wages back. We got our benefits back. And we made sure that we insourced every single job that we had to outsource. And that was the strength of our members at the bargaining table. And we went into metro bargaining, the supermarket pattern in 2015 and 2016. Once again, precarious jobs, part-time jobs. And we walked out of there making sure that our members got significant increases. We even put into place language that said if inflation goes up, so do our wages, over and above whatever the negotiated increases were. We put in benefit for part-time workers. But more importantly, we locked in schedules, real hours of work, so that our members knew how many hours of work they had this week, and it couldn't be manipulated by the employer. That shows non-union precarious workers that there is a way, there's a better way in order to secure your lives. University of New Brunswick, 2016. Once again, what did we do? We reduced qualifying hours for the employer-paid benefits. We put into place improved benefits for part-time members. There's a pattern here, brothers and sisters, about fighting for those in part-time, low-end jobs that need a leg up, that need people to fight for them. BC Transit, 2015. We phased out the lower wage job tier and moved more than 80 members into the higher wage classification. Now, one of the ones that is so important to us as we developed our soul, as we developed who we were as an organization, Cascade Aerospace in 2014 in Abbotsford, BC. They were on strike for 10 weeks. 10 weeks with a rotten employer. Real rotten employer. Had all kinds of concessions on the table. After 10 weeks walking the picket line, they finally took the concessions off the table because they knew they couldn't win. They put into place increases, but you know what they did? They left as a part of the package that the full-time union chairperson would be removed from the collective agreement. It would be time as required. Our members stayed on the picket line for another 2 weeks until the company backed off and reinstituted the full-time union rep. That's courage, brothers and sisters. Port of Vancouver. Our members were on strike for quite a while. And the provincial government, the Christy Clark government, introduced legislation into the House to order our members back to work. We hopped on a plane, we flew to BC. We went to the House. We were about to hold a press conference to say to Christy Clark and her government that if they passed the legislation, we were going to defy it. The bureaucrats got a hold of us. Said the Premier, the Minister of Transportation, the Minister of Labour want to meet with our union that was there. We bargained a settlement, and for the first time in the history of Canada, a government that introduced legislation to order workers back to work backed off. Congratulations to our truckers in BC. We took that victory from BC and we went into bargaining with CP, CN, and our members in Air Canada. And the federal government was hovering around our bargaining tables. The Minister of Labour was there, the bureaucrats were there. And there was the threat, of course, of that if there was a dispute, that they'd be ordering our members back to work. And we told the government, go ahead, order us back to work. introduce the legislation. We're looking to pick a fight with your government. You put in place the legislation, and I'm telling you to a member, we will defy it. The federal government never introduced the legislation. And here's why it's so important, because when they leave us alone, we bargained incredible settlements with CP, incredible settlements with CN, incredible agreement with Air Canada where the bottom 25%, where our members in the lowest tier picked up a 25% pay increase. But we also understand that corporations that do well in Canada have a commitment to Canada. And we said to Air Canada, and we said to CP, and we said to CN, and we said to VIA, and we just said to Suncor, you're making money, billions in Canada, you're going to commit back to our communities. And we negotiated, brothers and sisters, a Canadian Community Fund, which we are using to put money into First Nations water systems, women's shelters. And we used that fund, if you can imagine, to give $500,000 to Fort McMurray to make sure that the community of Fort McMurray knew that Unifor was with them. SaskTel earlier this year, women advocates positions in each of the 3 bargaining units. Since 2013, Unifor has negotiated 67 new women's advocate positions, with more than 300 women's advocates to assist members in dealing with domestic violence and abuse. This is the commitment to the women of our union, to make ending violence against women a part of our union culture in everything we do. Irving Shipbuilding. We put into place a campaign, a project. It's called Pathways to Shipbuilding, to train Aboriginal workers for work at the shipyard. And when they complete the program, those Aboriginal workers will be working in the shipyard in Halifax. We built on an earlier and unique partnership with Women's Unlimited, that provided education and training for 20 women in welding and fabrication. These women work today in the shipyard. We can accomplish all of this, brothers and sisters. When we put our collective hearts and soul into something, we will always be successful. Bombardier 2014 strike, an 8-week strike. You know what was over? Yes, the employer wanted to take away and make changes to our benefit plan, but they backed off that proposal earlier in the fight. But what fight was over was not over our current employees, but the fact that they wanted our new members that hadn't even started yet, future members, to start on a second tier and with a different pension plan. After 8 weeks on the picket line, the company backed off, and the new starts in Bombardier and Thunder Bay enjoy the same wages and pensions as everybody else in that operations. Now let me talk to you about courage. Courage. Town daycare in Glace Bay in 2015. 15 child care workers, predominantly women, on strike in the middle of a snowstorm that led to higher regulated minimum wages in Nova Scotia for all child care workers in the province. That's what I call courage. And let me tell you the importance of belonging to a union. The Woodstock Hospital in 2016, a brand new bargaining unit. First set of bargaining. We went to the bargaining table. We achieved pay equity settlements between 64 cents and $4 an hour retroactive all the way to 2014. And for one group a $3.66 per hour settlement retroactive all the way back to 1993. That's what happens when you belong to a union. And I have to recognize our brothers and sisters in Quebec at Silicium. And I want us all to go back to September of 2013 when we formed our new union. It was a 6-month lockout that was ongoing. Our members bent back to work with their heads held high. All of the concessions demands were turned back. And if you can imagine, in the face of all that adversity, we ended up winning a brand new pension plan for our members at Silicium. That's what I call a heck of a fight. And last week, national energy bargaining, so important to our union. In the middle of the worst downturn in 25 years in the oil industry, a new pattern agreement for the oil, gas, and petrochemical sector was overwhelmingly ratified by the National Ratification Conference of our National Energy Bargaining Program. Wage increases, job security language, increased funding for education, which will be a fully union-run education program through the PEL program. And the oil companies will now pay into Unifor's Canadian Community Fund, which for that industry, I can tell you, is an incredible breakthrough. Most important, in the midst of an economic crisis in this industry that employers try to exploit, this agreement for 50 bargaining units across Canada reinforces one of the most important pattern bargaining regimes in North America. I want to congratulate all of our energy members in this room, and I want to especially congratulate Local 707A in Fort McMurray that led the way. Think about what they went through in Fort McMurray to step up and lead and not be exploited and pushed back at a time of adversity. Congratulations to the leadership in this room. You make our union so proud. Sisters and brothers, I can go on, and you all know I can. The record shows that it is mission accomplished and a job well done by you, by hundreds of rank and file bargaining committees supported by our incredible staff. I want to ask everyone in this room who has served on a local union or industry bargaining committee, and all of our staff who have been to the bargaining table with them, to stand up, please, so that we can thank you. Please stand up. Three years ago, the political power influence of labor was at its lowest point since World War II. The labor movement was politically isolated and on the defensive. Trade union membership was declining. In Ontario, right-to-work legislation, the undoing of the Rand formula, was one election away. The Ontario election over workers' rights was a turning point for the labor movement in this country. We mobilized, we raised awareness, and we played a key role in raising the voter turnout by over 4%. And so it is with great pleasure that I congratulate from the bottom of my union heart the former leader of the Ontario Conservative Party on his retirement from politics that he announced 2 weeks ago. Tim Hudak, who led the polls in 2013 and pledged to rip up the Rand formula and fire 100,000 public servants. Did not do either of these things. And now has left politics to become a lobbyist for the real estate industry. Goodbye, Tim, and thanks for the memories. We won't forget you. An equally dangerous and menacing threat to our movement was, of course, entrenched in power right here in Ottawa. We faced a government that had contempt for trade union freedoms, a government that had intervened to prevent and provide strikes at Canada Post, Air Canada, and rail bargaining. It enacted a series of anti-labor laws. Remember C4, 377, 525. This was a government that had enemy lists, organized labor at the top of the list. I know I was on their list. I had ministers tell me how personally popular I was in the Conservative caucus meetings. So I would say to them, did anybody say anything nice about me in the caucus meetings? And the response was always, no, Jerry, not one nice thing, frankly. And you got to know, when they tell me that I'm proud on behalf of all of us, that they viewed us with the same type of disdain that we viewed them. But there were many others on the list. And here's how small this government was. First Nations communities whose pleas for help to acquire clean water and basic human needs were ignored. Aboriginal women who were ignored and abused by the obstinate refusal to call and inquire into the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Muslim women who were scapegoated in the most overtly racist political campaign ever in this country to exploit the decision of a small number of women to wear the niqab. They calculated that these wedge politics would give them a political advantage, but they miscalculated. A year before the federal election, there was an article in the National Post about conservative insiders who wanted an early election because, and I'll quote, "There's a new breed of highly politicized union in town, and they're intent on doing to Mr. Harper what they recently did to Tim Hudak in Ontario." Conservative Member of Parliament Bob Runciman claimed in that article that Unifor had an organizing fund of $50 million to be spent over a 5-year period. That's true. And because 1 year had passed, he had concluded, the genius, that we had $40 million left to spend on defeating the Harper government. Of course, those were the completely ridiculous ravings from inside Harper land of some people who are rather obsessed with us. But I can tell you that I have been directly told by two current conservative leadership candidates that wanted to meet, that it is true that Harper was pressured from the backbenchers to call in an early election, and he did call the early election because of that pressure. So how much did we actually put into the fight to stop Harper? The answer is that from the bottom to the top of our union and from coast to coast to coast, we gave our all to take our country back, and we left not 1 ounce of energy or heart in reserve, nor did we spend 1 dime less than was absolutely necessary. We should be very proud of our role in the election. Let me tell you a little story. I was in a cab in Vancouver during the election campaign, and a Unifor ad came on the radio. So I was listening to the ad. It was condemning the decision to close the Catsalano Coast Guard Station. At the end of it, the cabbie turned to me and he said, "I really like that ad." I said, "Who sponsored the ad?" He goes, "Unifor did." I said, "Who in the heck is Unifor?" He says, "They're this big-ass union in town." I'll tell you, I laughed and I gave him probably the best tip he had all day. Then I caught the plane and I went back to Toronto. Well, you know what, brothers and sisters? We are a kick-ass union. And today, our members are back to work in that Catsalano Coast Guard station. Brothers and sisters, the federal election was an important coming together for the labor movement. And I'm so happy that I see our friends here from the United Steelworkers. My personal friend Ken Newman is here. Together with Steel, and other unions, we were in part of Engage Canada, which was headed up by 3 brilliant people, and we conducted a major public information program prior to the election. There is no doubt that it was absolutely crucial to defeating the Conservatives, who had more money than all of the opposition parties concerned. Sisters and brothers, our workplaces, our labor movement, and our country now have a better future because of what we and the labor movement and 3 million new other voters did on October the 19th. And so once again, this gives me immense pleasure today to take note today of another announcement in recent days of the launch of a new Canadian enterprise, Harper and Associate Consulting, Inc. The 2 principals, of this new business are Mr. Stephen Harper and Mr. Ray Novak. Do you remember him? Remember? The loyal former chief of staff who denied to the end knowing of the $90,000 check, even though, as we learned in the Duffy trial from Harper's former legal advisor, that he was present in a meeting where he was told directly. This consulting company is based in Ottawa and will apparently provide advice on sticking to your story and on proven strategies to implement the barbaric political, economic, and cultural practices of the Conservative Party. I will say that new business venture with those types of priorities will ensure that we never see another Canadian government for another generation in this country. How about never? How about never? I was trying to think about the best way to say goodbye to Stephen Harper. And it was a struggle, candidly, to find something polite enough to say at this convention. And I thought about all kinds of salutes. I thought about a whole bunch of different things, but it would be not very helpful at this time because gloating probably wouldn't help. So I thought the best way that we could say goodbye and good riddance to Stephen Harper will come later this week when we welcome Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to our convention. In this spirit, I want to recognize that today, August 22nd, is the 5th anniversary of Jack Layton's death. Jack co-founded the White Ribbon Campaign, and our commitment to Jack must be from the men in this room that we will continue this fight in becoming more activist allies in stopping violence against women. Jack's vision for a progressive Canada inspires us to this day. Thank you, Jack. Your contribution, your love will never be forgotten. Unifor's politics has not only been about elections. Our role is also to bring the perspectives of workers to bear on the most important issues of our time. At our founding convention, we committed to putting the issue of good jobs on the national agenda by organizing a Good Jobs Summit. We were not quite sure, to be candid, how or what that would be. But a year later, it was a defining moment at Maple Leaf Gardens. Look, probably the only defining moment in Maple Leaf Gardens since 1967. And I'm a Leaf fan, all right? I can say that. That hurts to say that, you got to know. Arising out of that summit, we have today a Good Jobs Roundtable that includes some of this country's most important business, Aboriginal, and community leaders. Those relations and the credibility we built were in turn crucial in being able to force the withdrawal of legislation that would have effectively eliminated the right to strike in the private and public sectors in New Brunswick. We held a meeting in New Brunswick between Premier Gallant and our group, which included the highest profile corporate leaders in the province, Lana Payne, Scott Doherty, and myself, and we told him to get his nose out of our business. And there was no diplomacy involved in how we laid it out. 2 days later, Gallant's government withdrew the legislation and he fired the bureaucrat that was responsible for the legislation. That is effective political power, brothers and sisters. And on the issue of environment and climate change, which is the intergenerational issue of our time, we used our political influence to ensure that our members have a seat at the table, the designing of climate action plans. We brought our National Executive Board and the local union leadership to lobby the new government. We met with the Prime Minister, the opposition parties, the 17 ministers and their staff whose mandate affects our members and our economic and social futures. Unifor has opened the doors of power, and we will be heard by the decision makers. Don't you think it's time that working class people have the same influence that the business elites have enjoyed in Ottawa for so many years? Ten months after the election, the honeymoon with our Prime Minister and his government is continuing. And for the most part, it is entirely justified. Most of the government's actions so far are reversing the harmful legacy of the Harper era. As you know, legislation to repeal Harper's anti-labor laws were amongst one of the first actions of his new government. The government's endorsement of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations and for the calling of the inquiry into the missing and the murdered Aboriginal women are incredibly praiseworthy. The deal struck with the provinces to expand CPP is the most important social advance, I will say, in over a generation. But all of this is just a good start. But the government's agenda must now go further to meet the aspirations of Canadians for real change. We have to be very aware of the dangers that result from the pent-up frustrations of working class people over continuing inequality and economic stagnation. What started as a joke in American politics and all of the Trumpisms that made us laugh They're really not making us laugh anymore. When Trump calls women fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals, he refers to Senator Elizabeth Warren as Pocahontas and says that Mexicans are rapists and pedophiles and that Muslim women should be banned from entry, or Muslims should be banned from entry into the United States, and that the election itself is rigged, and that Americans may have to rely on the so-called Second Amendment rights. No one is laughing anymore. And all of these, of course, are the dog whistles of bigotry and violence. They are calculated to appeal to the anger of white working people who have been losing economic ground for years. Bernie Sanders has also touched a nerve amongst working class voters, but instead offered a message of inclusion and a political revolution against inequality and money in politics. And Hillary Clinton, of course, is an inspiration to all women in her pioneering role to be the first female president of the United States of America, and has the overwhelming confidence of America's Black and Hispanic communities. What is fascinating for Canadians to watch is how far the right and the left, how far from the right, the left, the center has fallen out. We don't have a Bernie in Canada yet, but surely Canada is ready for our own political revolution. And you can count us in. And if no one else is ready to step up, then why doesn't Unifor lead the political revolution ourselves? But herein lies a danger we must be concerned about. For workers, the Great Recession that began in 2008 has yet to end. Frank Graves, my friend, I think he is here in the room somewhere, from Echo's Research. Frank, are you here somewhere? Put up your hand and be recognized. He's in the back. Frank Graves tells us that 1/3 of Canadians today agree with the statement that I have lost all control over my economic future. These are the conditions that fuel the Trump campaign and the anti-immigration campaigns in Europe. These are the conditions that led to Brexit. And it could happen here. It could happen here unless the labor movement stands up tall and makes it clear that immigrants are not taking our jobs, and racism and scapegoating have no place in this country. So enter stage right. Literally stage right. A short list of Canadian would-be conservative leaders who are ready to exploit these fears. The undeclared but possible leader of the pack is Kevin O'Leary. O'Leary lacks Trump's good manners and hairstyling, but he is a first-class idiot in his own right. Am I supposed to say that? You call it the way you see it, right, brothers and sisters? This is the guy that said 3 billion people living in poverty is fantastic news. You know, when I would be on the Lang and O'Leary show, the two of us would start arguing in the makeup room before we even got onto the show. On labor, O'Leary makes Harper and Hudak look like Joe Hill. He once called on national television for the killing of unions. He does not speak French, and he said it would be a poor use of his time to learn because he already speaks the language of money. Tony Clement is another would-be successor to the Stephen Harper. And he would like Canadians to think he would be a friendlier face. But Clement, remember? He was responsible for the public service. He wanted concessions from federal workers, and my friend Deb Davio is in the room today. So he had them passed in a federal budget even before negotiations began. He was the minister who canceled the long-form census and argued it was about privacy, when actually it was about shutting down social planning. Or as his boss used to say, committing sociology. Then there's the ultimate Quebec neocon, Maxime Bernier. Yeah. Ooh. Look, Unifor members, we better pay attention to what he is saying because it would affect us. Here's what he's talking about. Here's what this guy wants to do. He wants to privatize airports. He wants to let foreign carriers fly domestic routes in Canada. He wants to completely deregulate telecom and remove all CRTC oversight. Eliminate all supply management for dairy and agriculture. He opposes any federal support for Bombardier. He would sign a new free trade deal with China. Sisters and brothers, working class people are not satisfied with the economic status quo, and nor should we be. I would suggest that it's time to reset, to push the restart button on the economy. It's time for a progressive agenda that working people can believe in, take hope from, and mobilize behind. I suggest it's time for Unifor to define change and not just talk about it, but organize and mobilize to make it happen. Isn't that what we were founded to do 3 years ago? Here's what we mean. It's time for the largest investment in jobs program since World War II. We mean investments to be detailed industry by industry and sector by sector, from aerospace to forestry to green energy to healthcare to rail to transit. We are ready, and we will be asking government and industry, are you ready? Because in a rich, first world country like Canada, it's time, sisters and brothers, to eliminate our social deficits. It's time to provide Canadians with comprehensive universal social security. It is great that young workers can look forward to an enhanced CPP, but we have to make sure that our present seniors have dignity in retirement. It's time for a major investments in a seniors' health and housing strategy. This country has been talking about a national child care program for 40 years. Isn't it time to do it now? A publicly funded early childhood education and national child care program? Isn't it time that we deliver a new national health care accord to fund our public Medicare system for another generation? A new health care accord that finally brings pharmacare into Medicare and ensures that no one goes without the medicines they need. Isn't it time that we once and for all end the crushing student debt and ensure universal access to post-secondary and vocational education by abolishing tuition fees? Are these ideas crazy? We already know the response from the managers of the status quo. Here's what we need to say to them. We say to them there are 2.35 million Canadians who are officially or unofficially unemployed. And if this country had the vision and the will to put 2 million Canadians to work, those new workers will take us finally out of the Great Recession. Those new workers would generate $200 billion in GDP, $100 billion in wages and incomes, $70 billion in government revenues. We say to the managers of the status quo, it's time to rein in the tax dodgers. In 2008, in Canadian dollars, there was $53 billion put into offshore tax havens. By 2015, that amount had doubled to $108 billion that is stashed in Panama and other tax shelters around the world. So please spare us the lectures about how we need fiscal austerity and free trade. We say to the ideologues that believe that any and every free trade deal is good. You're wrong. Headed dogma has resulted in a massive trade deficit and the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs. What kind of a government would ratify the TPP when it has no net benefits and it harms forestry, media, dairy, when we know it will undermine the #1 export sector with losses of up to 20,000 jobs in auto and auto parts? We have already been losing our jobs to Mexico. And our free trade deal with Mexico reached $25 billion last year. Consider this. The Mexican auto parts sector predicts that the TPP will cost up to 100,000 jobs in Mexico. And so if Mexico will lose jobs and Canada will lose jobs, where do you think plants will close first? Here or in Mexico? Obviously here, because the real wages of Mexican workers are no higher than they were 25 years ago when NAFTA was signed. NAFTA has been a lost generation for Mexican workers, and TPP will make it worse. Surely it's time that our workers across the continent together call out the TPP for what it is: an anti-worker corporate plan to engineer a global low-wage agenda at the expense of our jobs. If our political power rests on our collective bargaining power, let's begin with our bargaining program. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the bargaining program that we will debate tomorrow. The bottom line is that Canadian workers have been stuck in the weeds for a decade, and the most direct way out of the swamp is at the bargaining table. There is one round of bargaining that is very high profile as we meet here today, actually two. Our Bell Canada workers have been in a battle against a difficult employer since they broke it up. And I know that our members, over 5,000 within the craft division of our union, their bargaining expires on the end of November. And I know that our BTS members are going to be in bargaining next year. And I want to tell you, let's make sure we get our members ready. Let's make sure that we mobilize, and let's make sure that we win back our rights from Bell Canada that we so rightfully deserve. And as you know, we have just recently opened negotiations with the Detroit Three. And we made it very clear that this round is about more than just wages. And believe me, we're going to get wages and benefit improvements. But in simple terms, we have put the industry on notice that there will be no settlement unless we address the long-term futures in Brampton, Windsor, and in Oshawa. And I have a message to General Motors. And they better listen very carefully, because we're not screwing around, brothers and sisters. They came to the bargaining table, and they have said publicly that there will be no discussions about investment until after the agreement is ratified. And I'm telling General Motors that there will be no agreement, and we will shut down the operations right across Canada until they have committed in writing to what our products are going to be in St. Catharines and in Oshawa. Oshawa is not closing down at all. Our members are going to continue to work. GM thinks they have global power, but we have more power than they do as Unifor. Remember that, sisters and brothers. And there won't be a settlement at Ford either until they give us an engine for Windsor. And there's not going to be a settlement in Brampton either until we've locked in the existing products that are in the Brampton facilities today. Remember, GM received $10.8 billion from the federal government. Chrysler received about $3.5 billion. So on behalf of all of us in this room, our members in the auto industry, including the over 70,000, 75,000 in the auto parts sector, you need to know that you have the support of everyone in this room and the entire showdown and the entire union, because this is a showdown for jobs and a showdown for Canada. And we're up to the fight. But the message here today just can't be for our Bell members and our members in the auto industry. The message today has to be to all of our members in every industry and every sector. Your bargaining goals are also a fight for the type of country we want. And you too can count on the solidarity of the more than 310,000 members. We have a strong union and we have your back. Let's get it done for our members from coast to coast to coast. I'm not yet at my time. I might go a few minutes over, and I hope you don't mind. I'm a little wound up. Sisters and brothers, we got a lot of members who are still fighting for decent working conditions. The taxi drivers in Ottawa are Unifor members, and they have waged an incredible struggle to maintain the games achieved over the years and in the face of deregulation and Uber. Let me tell you a little story. Another cab story. This one is in Montreal. I got in a cab owned by a guy named Gus. The taxis aren't unionized in Montreal, at least not with Unifor that I'm aware of. But Gus had a Unifor lanyard around his rear view mirror. So I asked him about it and how he was doing. He told me he wasn't doing so well. He started driving at 4 a.m. that morning, and it was now 5 p.m. After working 13 hours, he had $117 in fares. Besides the thousands of dollars they pitch out every month, and I mean thousands of dollars in insurance, and a whole host, dispatch fees, everything under the sun. He was pitching out $600 a month over and above all of that, because 3 years earlier he bought his plate for $200,000. And that because of Uber, it was now worth $120,000 and dropping. I asked him about the Unifor lanyard, and he says, I hang this lanyard from my car with pride because we someday will have a union here in Montreal as well. There are many members of Unifor that work in the precarious economy, retail, hospitality, services, and manufacturing. And there is an army of precarious workers in Canada without a union. They are disproportionately women and workers of color. 4 in 10 women workers are employed in precarious jobs. 5 in 10 single-parent workers are employed in precarious jobs. More than 3 in 10 visible minority workers have precarious jobs. They are trapped in an economy where employment standards are nothing more than suggestions and enforcement mostly non-existent. The status quo means no chance for these workers to enjoy decent work and living incomes. These workers only have one chance. They need a dramatic and historic overhaul of employment laws. They need a new model of collective bargaining to fulfill their constitutional rights as workers. We have a system of labor laws that was created 3 generations ago in a very different economy for a very different working class. That system just does not measure up either to the economic realities we face today or to the decisions of our Supreme Court, which made it clear that the right to organize and to strike are constitutional rights protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All of these issues are on the table right now in Ontario and Alberta. And we have high expectations in the coming months that in these provinces we will see a modernization and expansion of worker rights. Isn't it time that after decades of decline for workers' rights, that we have laws and a labor relations system that offers every worker the ability to have decent work and a living wage? We need new labor laws to help organize. But the basic truth of the labor movement is that we organize or die. We have already beat the odds and defied the trend in our first 3 years as we organized more workers than any other union, and we did not decline. There are thousands more Unifor work members today than there were 3 years ago. Every organizing win, large or small, is precious to us. But of course, we are very proud of our organizing team for the largest organizing victory in over 20 years in North America, and that was the victory at Casino Rama. Can our new members from Casino Rama please stand up? Your victory, sisters and brothers, is a beacon to 2,000 more casino workers in Niagara where have been organizing for months. To the many hundreds of our new members and supporters at Casino Niagara, you will have a union soon. I want to send a message from this convention to our members and activists at Toyota Canada. Our organizing drive has come close on 2 occasions. There will be a 3rd try, and next time you will have a union in your workplaces. I want to welcome to our union our new members and community chapters across Canada, including the 40 South Asian women who have just formed the East Danforth Community Chapter. To our community chapter activists, we know how hard it is to organize in the conditions you face. But together we are going to build a new kind of union. Organizing is not a department within Unifor. It is all of us all the time. Sisters and brothers, I want you to think for a moment about how all of our stories are intertwined and linked. We all have a story of coming and overcoming. But the adversity we face is not the same and the outcomes are different because of the opportunities we are given. When we explore what we hold in common and make personal connections and commitments to solidarity, the result is powerful and transformational. Certainly that is the case in our relationship with the Aboriginal movement in this country. Over the past 3 years, we were moved and inspired by the speakers from the Native Women's Association of Canada and other organizations that came to our regional councils to speak about missing and murdered women. And now I'm pumped to have Cindy Blackstock, Justice Murray Sinclair coming to our convention. I will be so proud to lead our march on Parliament Hill to support the 94 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Let's think for a moment about Canada's national shame. The residential schools and the children taken from their families. A cultural genocide that stripped them from their identity and led them into abuse. There was no equal opportunity for them. 2 generations later, the legacy of the residential school is endemic. It is found in the shocking fact that while Aboriginal women make up 4% of our population, there are 35% of the female prison population. As the Native Women's Association put it so profoundly, the crimes arising from poverty are a life sentence for Aboriginal women. We are humbled by Aboriginal fighters for justice and the small things that we can do towards reconciliation. One of the first projects through our new Canadian Community Fund is at Shoal Lake in Manitoba. For decades, because of the conditions imposed on it by a water diversion project, the community has been without a source of clean drinking water. The community has been cut off and is accessible only by barge in the summer and an ice road in the winter. There is certainly no equal opportunity for this First Nation. From the funds secured for the Canadian Community Fund and rail bargaining and our other bargaining, we will be helping to build a training center to help the Shoal Lake First Nations build a road that they will call Freedom Road, to link them to fresh water and a new future. Sisters and brothers, it is the intertwining of our story that is important in building solidarity in a social movement. Don't worry, I'm going to be coming to an end soon. I want to return to my family story, and I hope my family won't be upset. Let me kind of walk through it a little bit. My sister Donna, the oldest, was born in Guyana. My mother and father came to Canada, and my sister Rosemarie was born here in Canada. And then my mother got pregnant again, three girls in 3 years, and she went back to Guyana and had my sister Jacqueline. And then my mother and father left Guyana and came back to Canada to build a better future. So it took almost 3 years before they had a stabilized present and had bought a home for my family. And they brought my 3 sisters over in May of 1958. And my mother, rest in peace, never talked about that time in her life, because that was the time of her life that she left her 3 babies in another country and sacrificed with my father to come here to build a better life. In October, the 4th and last kid was born, which my sisters always said was a bit of a mistake. I tell this story in recognition of sacrifice, because I know my parents came to Canada for 4 reasons: Donna, Rose, Jacqueline, and me. And that is the typical story of sacrifice of so many immigrant families that came here to make a better life for their children. Now I want you to think for a moment about the Syrian refugees that have come to Canada. At an event here in Ottawa to support Syrian refugees, I met a young family with 3 kids. These kids were making me laugh. They were playing. They didn't have a worry in the world. And I looked at their parents because they had just arrived. and they didn't speak English, and they had this real look of concern on their face. You know, but I looked at those kids and I knew that their future was going to be wonderful. And I knew the parents were going to be wonderful. And there are things that were going to be stable within time. Because you see those three kids? They're going to be our next trade persons. They're going to be our next nurses, doctors, business people. They may even be our next labor leaders. You see, I have no concern about this family because they are here, and for one reason only, it's about opportunity. Now, I want you all to think for 1 second. I want you to think for 1 second about your personal life. Concentrate about yourself, your family, your kids. Think about your house. Think about your apartment. Think about where you live. Think about your church. Think about your community center. Think about the swings where your kids play. I want you to think about your community. I want you to think about your workplace. I want you to think about the role you play in your workplace with your union. I want you to think about your union family. I want you to think about all that defines who you are as a person. And now I want you to. It's gone. You have nothing. No house, no home, no school. You are chased out of your country with nothing. Everything you spent your entire life building. You know, a month ago I met refugee families that our union is supporting in camps in Jordan. I met families that defy all stereotypes of what refugees are supposed to be. I met powerful, talented, and determined people who are all well educated, had businesses, some of them, careers, who had homes, and then bang, everything was taken away from them. They were forcibly taken from the homes, and they find themselves in camps with nothing. I spoke to a family that fled their home. There were still clothes in the washing machine. They thought they would be gone for 2 days. That was 2 years ago. Think of 33,000 people in a desert, 1.5 miles from the border where you lived. In a desert. What do you build in a desert? First thing, think about the challenges. No water, no food, no lodging. From January of this year, 525 children were born. You need a hospital. You need nurses. You need doctors. How are you going to keep the kids busy? You need a school. You need soccer fields. What are you going to do with the parents? How are they going to continue on their plight, which is why they left in the first place? There's not much of an opportunity there. Think about the fact that there are 65 million refugees in the world today, and this population grew by 6 million last year. Half of them come from 3 places: Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. And 80% of them are trapped in refugee camps in Africa and the Middle East. What opportunity do they have? It is why I'm so proud of our union and our grassroots support teams who have made a personal commitment to assist 5 refugee families make a new home in our country, and our ongoing support of over 100 families in Jordan. Perhaps there will be opportunity for these families, but also a wonderful opportunity for our members who are part of the sponsor groups to learn and grow from the bonds of solidarity that we will build. And I want to thank those members that have stepped up. Sisters and brothers, this has been an amazing 3 years. This has been the longest, shortest 3 years of building and development, of fighting and winning, of organizing and growing and personally growing. I want to thank the thousands of you who came forward to found our regional councils and our industry councils, Quebec Council, to serve on all of our new leadership bodies and committees. I want to thank our National Executive Board. I want to thank my incredible lifelong friend, Peter Kennedy. My friend, Renaud Gagné. The three fantastic women, Lana, Joey, and Katha. My incredible assistants, Jenny, Deb, Dave, Shane, Scott, Bobby, Sylvain, and John. I want to thank our staff at the national office and across the country, and all the activists at every level for making this union and this great organization that it is. Most of all, I need to thank my family and close personal friends for their support in making it possible for me to do what I do. And thank you all for what we will do together now as we go to the next stage of Unifor. Sisters and brothers, it's time. It's time for real progress for our members and time for progress for all working people. It's time for Unifor to be the voice, the force that defines change for a truly progressive Canada. It's time for real equality for women, Aboriginal workers, workers of color, the LGBT community, and our disabled community and young workers. It's time to build Unifor into a union for everyone. Sisters and brothers, it's our time. Let's seize the time. Let's get it done. Thank you all very much for everything you do. Get up here. Everybody.